introduce this next session. We have a fireside chat that's being hosted by David Bailey, who's the CEO of BTC Inc. And this guest is an incredible champion of freedom. I have to admit, I've kind of been fangirling backstage. I'm not going to lie about it. But this man, his revelations changed the world as we know it. He exposed terrible atrocities being perpetrated by government. He sparked an entire movement, and he put his life on the line in the process. Can you please give a huge round of applause to Edward Snowden?
Stops for the conference. They didn't tell me that they were going to pump the price of Bitcoin so much. So I want to apologize to everyone in here trying to stack sats. I know we sent you back, but it is what it is. So, I've been told to buy a couple minutes of time right here as we're waiting for everything to get set up. Keep buying a little bit of time. But, for us, when making Bitcoin fun again, is really about a return to the roots of Bitcoin and why we're here in the first place. And it's really hard to think of someone that encapsulates more what it means to speak truth to power and why we're here than Edward Snowden. And so, I'm majorly fanboying right now. This is super cool. And Edward, can you hear us? We're still working on the audio, so I'll keep buying time. Those panels this morning, wow, that was incredible. And Lynn Ulbricht, how awesome is that? So something I forgot to mention on the opening day, there are 3 charities actually that we are supporting for this conference, and there are QR codes displayed around the event. One is Free Ross, another is the Bitcoin Venezuela, BitVin, and another is Reading Bitcoin, which is a nonprofit in China that's going to be translating technical papers for Bitcoin into Chinese and other languages in Asia. So if you see those QR codes, please support them, donate. They're all really important causes, doing a lot of good in the world, so please. All right, do we have the audio working? Still not quite, all right. We had it working perfectly just a little while ago, so no fear, we'll get it back working.
While we're waiting, I have some wonderful things to announce. So our interactive session this morning, I don't know if you guys have looked at your program, but it's a really exciting lineup of people. Some of the best speakers we actually have will be at the interactive stage, so make sure that you check out the program so you don't miss any of the awesome things going on there. I also wanted to mention the BTC store, so you can actually redeem exhibitor booth tickets for store swag. So make sure that you check out the store and make the most of all the things that this conference has to offer. I'm not sure if you guys have had a chance to check out all the exhibitor booths as well. There's some really great stuff happening there. And again, some really cool swag. So I have to commend this conference for having some really cool stuff on offer here. There was another thing I wanted to mention. Let me reiterate, so Lynn Ulbricht, she will be presenting again at 11 on the interactive stage. She'll actually be reading a letter from Ross. So you guys don't want to miss out on that one. Make sure that you head down there and check that out. So, not sure, is the sound up yet?
Nope.
It does not appear that. It's like at a time like that, I wish I'd prepared a song or something. We could do it.
Naomi's a lot better at buying time than I am, so.
Alright, well, a reminder, if anyone is not at the conference and you know that they would like to be at the conference, this conference is being live streamed, except for this session. This session is not being live streamed, so they unfortunately will not be able to tune on this one. Every other session they will be able to check out. I'm not sure whether this one will be available after the conference. You'll have to hear from Bitcoin Magazine, BTC Inc. about that. But all the other sessions, especially that last panel, which I thought was fantastic, will be available online. So make sure that you check out that, send a link to anyone who couldn't be here. You can get the link from Bitcoin Magazine's website, or you can also get it from this conference website, which is bitcoin2019conference.com. So make sure you send that out to everyone who wanted to be here, but couldn't quite make it. We still, how are we going for sound yet? I'm sure that they'll just interrupt us. We'll hear like the booming voice of God saying, "We have sound," or something like that, right?
I hope.
So another huge thank you to everyone who has been tweeting out images from this conference. There have been some killer moments that I'm really happy that you captured. So the hashtag people have been using is Bitcoin2019. If you have things that you wanted to share, I know that the conference Twitter has actually been retweeting all of those, and also it's a great way to interact with people who are at the conference here. So if you're trying to connect with people, this conference is also, I mean, it's not just about fun, it's also about networking and connecting with attendees. So if you wanted to know who's here, make sure that you are checking out that hashtag, because you could find out, connect with some great people at this conference, find out who's here, find out who's talking about it. Also a great way for people at home who couldn't make it to be sharing the moments as well. Maybe you can like Photoshop them into your photos. They wouldn't even notice. It's a great idea to do those things.
A little humble brag. We were trending yesterday across the state of California.
Really?
So,
that's so, round of applause for that. That's awesome. That's cool. Yeah, that's very, very cool.
Hold on one second, guys. I'm gonna find out what's going on real quick.
Now I'm here alone. Let me talk about something that I'm very passionate about, in a way to give Lynn Ulbricht some more time, actually, because I would have loved to see her be on the main stage a little more. So who doesn't know about Ross Ulbricht or about the trial and everything that went on? Everyone knows about it. I'm really happy to hear that, because I often do conferences and no one knows about it, and that is a tragedy. To see such atrocities being perpetrated by the criminal justice system makes me incredibly, incredibly sad. So it's great that you guys know about it. Who has signed the petition so far? So there's still a lot more people who could sign it, who could send it to their friends to sign it. The petition is for clemency. The idea is to get a reduced sentence. Russ is currently in jail for double life plus 40 years for all non-violent offences. There was an incredible smear campaign that happened against him, where all of these things that he wasn't even charged with were put in the media, and we're ready to go. So you will hear more about that.
It's great to talk to you. Let's start by framing this conversation. What is the role of privacy in society? What is the role of privacy in society, and why do we need it?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those questions that we constantly struggle with. It's funny because we just saw Eric Voorhees on stage, and he ran Shapeshift for a long time, which was a very useful service, right? It allows you to go from one chain to another chain, right? From one token to another. And it was free, like in terms of identification. We were able to just openly transact. And then they completely changed their business model, because they got, as I understand it, a demand letter from the government saying, if you don't start monitoring all of your customers, if you don't start collecting passwords, if you don't start storing all of this stuff for our benefit, we're going to charge you, prosecute you, shut down your business, yank your license. I'm not sure that's Eric, you're down in the and go from there. But the whole thing is, all right, so this is the status quo. This is the way that banking works. This is the way that sorry, I'm giving some indications from back of stage. You guys want me to max it out. But I've got my audio up at 11, so I'm not sure where our audio channels are coming from. But just to reiterate quickly, today, you're allowed freedom of speech in some measure online. You can say what you want, and the worst case that you'll get is you're going to get kicked off of YouTube, you're going to get kicked off of Twitter, you're going to get deplatformed, right? This is a big level of interference, but it's happening from the efforts of private companies rather than governments. Now, when it comes to trade, We can't do the same thing where we send money. We can't trade, we can't exchange, we can't interact with each other in the same way. And this is what I think, for me, is the most interesting point about Bitcoin. And I've said this before. Bitcoin is free money, right? And I don't mean that like the price is relative. Really, I don't mean that like the price is rising. This is not financial advice. You guys have heard it. Things are going up really parabolic right now. But what I mean is it's the first free money, right? You are able to exchange and interact permissionlessly. And when I think about privacy, when I think about liberty, that's what this is all about. What does liberty mean? It's freedom from permission. It means we live our lives in a way that we can experiment, we can engage, we can try things, we can even fail. And we don't have to get, a permission slip from the principal's office. We're not watched, we're not recorded. And because of this, our mistakes don't haunt us. And this core point, right? This ability to act without permission, so long as you're not harming someone else, so long as you're not infringing on the rights of others. This is the foundation of all rights. When you talk about due process, when you talk about freedom of speech, when you talk about freedom of religion, whatever you have, right? The right to a fair trial, the reason we have these rights, what they are recognizing, what they're codifying, is a right to the self. Right? And this goes in our language all the way down to private property, right? Privacy is that thing that says you belong to you rather than to society. And what I fear is that over the last decades, as technology has changed the world in ways that make monitoring people and peoples at scale, right? Populations seeing everything that's going on in new ways and deeper ways, right? It used to be if governments wanted to watch us, they had to put teams of men on the street to follow you around, working in buildings, in cars, out on foot, to see where you go, to see who you meet, how you got there, how long you were there, to sit close enough into the cafe to know generally what your activities were, but not so close that you go, who is this guy that's sitting behind me, right? Now, all of this happens with devices that we ourselves pay for, right? Whether it's your home internet connection, whether it's the phone that's in your pocket right now, we are padding out a permanent record of every private life. And once we do that, privacy stops being the status quo, right? Liberty stops being the natural state of things. And now it's a point in tension with the systems of the day. And what does that actually boil down to, right? What does that actually mean? Privacy has always been the natural state of human existence. Because even if you lived back in an old village in the day, people would gossip about you, people would understand you, people would see kind of how you go, how you live. But it was very easy to get away from this. You walked out in the woods, you were alone, you closed your doors and there was no one but you. Unless they came in and ransacked your journals, these things belong to you. But now that there's a record of everything you've created, of every message you've ever sent, every border you've ever crossed, everything you've ever bought, every conversation you've ever had, everything you've ever typed into that search box, right? Instead, the only real control we have over the measure of privacy, over the measure of liberty in our lives, in our countries, in our world today, is that governments and institutions, meaning both governmental and corporate, decide to grant us. Because what we really have now is a record of all of our lives. The telecommunications companies have, that Facebook has, that the government has, that Visa and MasterCard have, right? And simply their willingness or their agreement with us that they will not read it, except where the law permits it, except when they choose to break that, and when it's simply too expensive and too difficult. But the whole thing about too expensive, too difficult, just over the span of my life, just over the span of the last few years, we've all seen that difficulty dropping and dropping and dropping. And as we get better deep learning, machine learning, and artificial intelligence methods of sorting through big data, eventually it's going to be cheap, it's going to be easy, it's going to happen on the fly, and so what then, right? So when you ask, why does privacy matter, right? And we scope back from all of this of what's happening now and how does it work, into what it means. Surveillance, everybody thinks about 2013 and why I came forward, and they think surveillance. 2013 wasn't about surveillance. Surveillance was the mechanism used to discuss a conversation that was affecting all of us, which is that our governments, even in what we like to believe are free and open societies, are becoming increasingly comfortable making decisions without involving the democratic process, right? We weren't asked if we wanted to vote in favor of mass surveillance, right? They simply didn't, right? We weren't asked, the courts weren't even allowed to consider if these systems were constitutional. Every time someone got evidence that there were spy activities, and this is about happening back to 2004, right before 2013 came forward, there were indications that this system had been built and that it was operating unlawfully. And we got some of the biggest NGOs in the United States who challenged it. We got the American Civil Liberties Union who challenged this in court. They were representing Amnesty International, right? And when it got all the way up to the Supreme Court, right, they said, look, this is a really interesting controversy, and this is something that we should be able to weigh in on. But the government, and by this they mean the executive branch, is saying this is a secret. And because it's a secret, the courts don't have the place to decide this, because it's not for the courts to decide what is or is not secret. It's up to the courts to decide what is or is not lawful. The champion of secrets, right, the master of the keys, that's the executive branch. And they say it's secret, so we have to trust them. But that puts society in a position where we have to trust the executive. And if we don't know what the executive is doing, we don't know how to vote. And if we can't vote in a meaningful, informed way, we can't grant consent in a meaningful way. Which means even though we have a democracy in name, it's not truly meaningful. And I know this is a long ramble, and it's not really original. This is where we get back to that key point of why privacy matters. Is without privacy, we have no power. Because it's privacy that gives us agency. It's privacy, that right to the self, that allows us to come up with that original idea. That could be a bad idea. It could be one we're criticized for. It could get us disowned by our friends or our community or society, right? But then once we have that idea, we can share it with people that we do trust and go, is this a good idea? What do you think about this? And they can sharpen that idea. They can challenge us. They can argue with us. And then we share it again, and we share it again. And once, step by step, it goes more broadly out into the world. And once it's gone these extra steps, right? Suddenly you no longer have a person talking about this. You no longer have a table talking about this. You have a city talking about it, and then you have a country talking about it, and then you have the whole world talking about it. And that is the origin of progress. Without privacy, we don't have progress. Without privacy, we don't have any meaning in the rest of our rights. Because what is a right? A right exists to protect, not the majority, because the majority decides what is or is not lawful. The majority doesn't need rights. The majority hardly needs laws. Rights exist to protect the minority against the majority. And there is no more vulnerable minority than the minority.
That was a great answer. And I'm going to just jump along on my questions because I feel like that encapsulated a lot of stuff. So your story, I think, is one that showcases that governments don't want to give up the power to permission. And so Bitcoin is a challenge to that. How do they attack Bitcoin? How do they stop Bitcoin? What should this community be looking for from governments around the world that are not happy with it?
Well, right now, again, the panelists we just had, anybody who's worked in the cryptocurrency space, on the institutional side, can tell you that the first thing government goes after is privacy, right? What they go is, all right, you can have your magic money, you can do whatever you want, as long as it fits our status quo, right? You might be a square peg, but you're going to have to find a way to shave enough off of your system to fit into our round hole. And the problem is the thing that they're being shaving off of Bitcoin, and the thing that they've been shaving off of all of these institutions that are involved in this space are the protections for the people who are using it, right? They're shaving off the digital equivalent of our rights, right? Our freedom from unreasonable search, seizure, interference in our private interactions. And this is what I think is the most important thing that Bitcoin is missing right now, right? All the Bitcoin developers, you hear them talking about it. We've had panels, I think yesterday at the conference actually, where they talk about the privacy problem and where it's going. And here's the thing. The lack of privacy is an existential threat to Bitcoin. And it's an existential threat to the cryptocurrency space broadly. Thanks. The reason why is privacy is the only protection that Bitcoin has for the users of it, people engaged in the ecosystem, to protect them from changes in the political winds of whatever jurisdiction they have in. And you might be in the United States right now and go, look, you know, I'm a fan of government or I'm not a fan of government, whatever. I'm not worried about this. I've got my passport, right? I've got my bank statements. I've got everything. I can, you know, give a blood sample or whatever it is that the exchanges are asking for today. And then I can go about my business, right? You know, it's worse than me. But here's the thing about privacy that people forget. If one of you gives it up, because you go, it's not useful for me, you're taking it away from everybody else who doesn't have that level of comfort, right? Who doesn't have that privilege. Go, look, privacy is meaningless to me. Because they live in China, or they live in Russia, or they live in Iran, or they live in Venezuela, right? Where they're very much in a more vulnerable position, where they could be tomorrow, because the laws change every day, right? And this is the thing about privacy that I think so many of us today have forgotten. And why it is so important to defend this is it doesn't matter if you have nothing to hide, because privacy isn't about something to hide. Privacy is about something to protect. Right? And the thing that you're protecting is a free and open society. The thing that you're protecting is the right to act and to do, to try and to be different, right? Because that's what privacy protects. It protects the different people. It protects the transaction that doesn't match the other ones, right? And, you know, people will make good arguments here and they'll go, look, there are criminals who use Bitcoin, right? And they're right, there are criminals out there who use Bitcoin. There's a hell of a lot more criminals who use the dollar, right? But there are criminals who are using Bitcoin, right? And they're serious criminals, and they're people that we don't want, basically preying on society. But here's the thing, no amount of chain analysis, going out there and going, all right, Bitcoin is providing at least pseudonymity, even if it's not providing anonymity. And we're gonna go, this Bitcoin transaction from, you know, wherever this old TXID, you know, we pull it out of the muck and we dust it out, and then we go, it connects to this one, and 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 then finally it went to Coinbase. And luckily, Coinbase is our little deputy. So let's go to Coinbase and let's go, you know, whose name is attached to that. But the thing is, the coin could have been spent 25 times by then. But now you're asking a question, or you're being asked questions. You're going to have to defend this, and you're going to have to go through, you know, where did you get this, and where did you get it from that person? And eventually you're going to have to say, I don't know, and that's going to be suspicious. And if you actually look at the terms of services, terms of service for these major exchanges, when they go into their know your customer policies, right, their anti-money laundering regulations, where they go, you have to do all of this stuff. And by the way, in every case, they go far beyond what the law requires, because they just want to cover themselves. If you fail to meet whatever arbitrary burden they impose on you, they don't close your account and return your money. They close your account and keep you, right? And so this is the thing that I think people need to think about, is what government goes in today, and will always go after in these spaces, are the on and off ramps, right? There are the points where you either need to buy this, or you need to sell this because you want to sell, or you want to, you know, buy groceries. And at least now, you know, they're not taking that very frequently, you know, at Whole Foods, unless you're in a beta or whatever. But this is the thing. This is a point of existential vulnerability. And there are really only two ways to get around this. Fundamentally, you can either structure the system in such a way that you've encouraged enough adoption that now you can spend directly on groceries, and the grocery store doesn't have time to take your blood sample and your passport. Or you can structure the system in such a way that the user cannot prove the provenance of their funds beyond the last transaction, right? And when we have these sort of ageless transactions where you've got one or none, you can go, look, I got this from here, right? And I could have rebalanced my wallet or whatever, and there's no way to show it back beyond that. That's the only way to do it. We need users to have a plausible explanation that they cannot go around, right? There's a lot of developers that are going, oh, we'll have selective transparency. Selective transparency that's not driven by the user and that creates user-facing harms is a problem. Actually, there's one more way to go around this, and hopefully we'll get people in the room working with this. And this is to go and just completely obsolete the home market. And the way this works is all of these on-ramps and off-ramps today are driven by basically contact with banks. Anywhere where governments are going, we have to license you to do monetary transactions. And right now, everybody in the space is still going, look, we're incorporated in Texas or San Francisco, or God forbid the state of New York. And because of this, we can only do these this certain way. And if, we have these new FATCA regulations, or if we have something from the New York Attorney General, or anything like that, we're screwed. We have no defense, we have no recourse, we have to reincorporate, right? And we still live in the US as a problem. This is actually something that governments count on wherever their jurisdiction is, so long as they have this set of rules. What we don't see happening in the crypto space now, which is honestly unforgivable given how many new sort of millionaires and billionaires we have, is you guys need to start lobbying for more favorable jurisdictions, right? And the whole point of this is just that they won't interfere with your business when it's working internationally. It doesn't matter if you're doing transactions in the United States or in France or Germany or anywhere else, unless you're in this model that we've always had, where you're trying to be the next, Bank of America, you're trying to be the next First National. But the world isn't waiting for the next First National. What the world needs is the first post-national, right? You need an entirely digital This is a real thing. So long as you have people and desks and machines that they can put their hands on, right? And you're not distributing them through new routing numbers, where it's difficult to tell using mixed nets and things like Tor, where the communications are originating, where they're ending. And we don't bake this in a way that the user doesn't have to care about. It's invisible to them, right? They just open the app and it works. There's always going to be that point of pressure. And so long as the state, maintains a monopoly on the use of violence, it is always going to be applied in these ways. And I think a lot of people in this room understand that, right? But so long as we don't change and we play by the rules because we go, it's uncomfortable, I don't want to do this, and I believe very strongly that Eric and Shapeshifters didn't want to do this, but they felt compelled to do this, right? The thing is, what have these guys done since? And this is not to pick on them, right? They're just the famous name in this space. What's next? How do you respond, right? If the response is just to go, okay, we lost, you win, we're going to keep filing our taxes and going on with our lives, this is why we can't have nice things.
So I want to ask you about what I think is maybe one of the strangest incidents to occur in Bitcoin since I've been involved, which was the shadow broker incident, where someone gained access to really, I guess, some of the most advanced technology out there, tried to auction it off for Bitcoin. It has to be the worst auction I've ever seen executed because I don't think they had any Bitcoin come in. But do you have any context for that? And then can you also speak to how these technologies are being used for ransomware and what implications that has for just cybersecurity and OPSEC in general?
Right, so no, this is a great question, and I know it's uncomfortable for a lot of people in the audience, right? Because this gets back to the bad things that are done with Bitcoin. And again, every technology is going to be used. The thing that we need to focus on is the frequency, right? And the level of damage that's occurred from it. And how do we mitigate that in a responsible way that still rights respect, right? And the way I look at this is, so for those who aren't familiar, the Shadow Brokers incident was basically the NSA, which is supposed to have the most advanced security in the world, right? These are supposed to be the world's best hackers. They're spying on you, they're spying on everyone else. They got pantsed. And some group that remains unknown to this day stole basically a arsenal of their sort of digital weapons, right? Their hacking tools that they use for espionage. And then they just put them on the internet. And they were like, hey, you want to pay us for it? We'll give you some extra, we'll give you some new tools, things we didn't publish, things we didn't share, whatever. And the NSA, the FBI, the combined might of the US government has never found these people, to our knowledge, right? And they kind of rode off into the sunset. But here's the thing, the problems didn't stop after that. The things that they published just openly, that they gave away for free, ended up being used then in ransomware attacks that went all over the world. And so the way this worked is the NSA created digital weapons. They couldn't control them, right? And what I want you to think about here in the context is that governments around the world are hacking, right? Luxembourg is hacking. And if the NSA can't keep their hacking tools safe, what are the odds Saudi Arabia is going to be able to do the same thing? So now we have all of these governments that are attacking people with these extraordinary capabilities that we cannot keep safe. They eventually get stolen, they eventually get sold, they eventually get leaked, they eventually get ransomed, and then they get used to ransom the rest of us, because now they're just openly in the hands of criminals, right? And recently we had the government of Baltimore that had the whole city shut down basically because their systems got locked unless you paid a Bitcoin ransom, right? They weren't getting back in, and these guys just didn't do a great job on their IT. They didn't have backups. I think I just read that the city in Florida had similar problems. It hit one of the world's largest shipping companies. It hit hospitals. It hit all kinds of things, right? So the NSA, step after step after step after step, ended up screwing our own critical infrastructure. But everybody keys on this point that Bitcoin was being used to ask for payment, right? And sure, okay, maybe it was. It doesn't really matter because I don't believe that was the motivation of these attackers. It seems clear that this was actually done for a political effect, and I believe it's actually the state that's behind this, but we don't know. The bottom line is this, all right. These bad guys have done this thing. These bad guys are using ransomware that are not on this level of sophistication. They're not state-backed. They're just, kids in basements and ordinary, dime store criminals. How do you deal with it? And this is a much longer conversation that gets very complex. But if tracking Bitcoin transactions were effective, the shadow brokers would be in jail. Because it's important to understand there are altcoins out there, privacy coins, that wouldn't have this same transaction trail, right? And then you just shift it into a Monero or Zcash, or you've got the new ones like Beam and these other things David Chow is working on called Elixir, and then you shift it back into the chain, onto the Bitcoin blockchain, and you've got none of that history, right? And nobody even sees this kind of thing happen. But these guys just didn't do that as far as we understand, or maybe they did, it doesn't matter, but there's 1,000 ransomware attacks where we can point out where they didn't do this. They just did it naked on the Bitcoin ledger, which is completely open to the public. And then what, right? It's out there, Bitcoin's worth $1 billion, whatever it is today. And whether they're spending it or not, we don't see these guys getting jailed. And the reason why is I know this quite well from my personal experience. You can have the most powerful tools of surveillance in the world, and they're not going to solve one problems. They're not even going to solve many big problems. They're going to solve a very few big problems. And this is the thing, people think about mass surveillance. They think about all this blockchain analysis. They think about basically de-anonymizing people as a public safety measure, because this is how the government always argues it. They go, if you don't give us this extraordinary power, if you don't give us this new counterterrorism legislation, if you don't give us this anti-money laundering law, your children are going to die. You know, the Iranians are going to be camped out on the White House lawn, right? The oceans are going to boil off. The atmosphere is going to catch on fire. It's the end of the world. Because that's the emotionally simple argument. And sad to say, it works. And it has worked and it will continue to work until we as people change and grow up. And that's not going to happen anytime soon. But the thing here is this. These surveillance programs, when we look at, in the case of mass surveillance in 2013, right, this is the deepest look that the public has ever gotten into how these programs actually operate, who they're targeted against, where they're effective, where they're not effective. President Obama himself, right, who came out and criticized me so strongly in June of 2013, by January of 2014, said, this conversation made us stronger as a nation, although he could never condone what I did, right? Fair enough. I'm not asking for permission.
As you can tell, Edward, you have a lot of fans here.
But here's the thing on that. To his credit, what happened between 2013 and 2014 was he appointed 2 different independent commissions, you know, independent in the context of government. And these were filled with all his friends, right? People who were supposed to look at all the evidence. They had complete access to classified information. They could go to the director of the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, and go, where were these programs used? How did they help us? You know, are they saving lives? Because we're taking a lot of heat for this, and we want to know if we should ditch this program or not. If we can just give this up and life will go on. And when we first got into 2013, all these agencies leapt out of their chairs and said, these journalists who publish these stories, they're going to have blood on their hands, right? People are going to die. The same thing we do always here. But then once these guys, these committees dug in, it was the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board and the President's Review Group on Intelligence and Communications Technologies. After they did their investigations, they found that while they had said initially, the government had said initially, these things have been used in all of these different ways and they thwarted all of these plots. The very first program that I ever worked with journalists to review, which was Section 215 of the Patriot Act, this is where the United States government was collecting the phone records of everyone in the United States. It didn't matter if you were suspected of any crime or not, your grandma was in there, right? And they were just doing it because there had been a law, a section of the Patriot Act, that said the government had the authority to collect any records that it considered relevant to a counterterrorism investigation, right? And they considered every phone record in the United States relevant to this. Now, they didn't tell us at the time, we didn't learn for many years about this, and this was unconstitutional in my opinion, illegal and likely unconstitutional in the opinion of at least one federal court. But the thing here is this. When they dug into it, the findings of the committee was this program had never stopped even a single terrorist attack in the United States. They said, in fact, it had not even been helpful, it had not even made, these are their words, a concrete difference in a single counterterrorism investigation. Because by the time the government had enough to look at you, on the stage, or you in the audience, and go, we think this guy's up to no good. Here's his name, here's his phone number, here's his email to put in these databases to pull him out, because we've got everybody in the world in there. They have enough to go through the old traditional mechanisms of law enforcement that we know work, to go to a judge and say, we think this person's up to no good, sign a warrant, and then we'll go wiretap that person individually. We'll tap their phone specifically, we'll go into their house, we'll plant a surveillance device, we'll hack their computer, whatever, targeted rather than mass surveillance, right? And we know that targeted surveillance has worked in the past. But this is the funny thing about that Shadow story, right? And the whole Bitcoin, is the enemy narrative that we see in the world today. The shadow brokers didn't get caught, no matter the fact that Bitcoin and these cryptocurrencies are so open, they are so trackable today, because mass surveillance isn't enough. Mass surveillance isn't about public safety; it's about power. It's about social influence. It's about diplomatic, sort of espionage. And it's about seeing what everyone is doing, because that information, or intelligence, as they call it, allows you to understand not, the hardest of your hard targets, because bin Laden stopped using a cell phone in 1998, but to understand what ordinary people are doing, because there is value in that. And the government, look, right or wrong, might say we want to be. It's useful to the government to see what it is, to see how they're trading, and to go, we want to either authorize this or not authorize this. We want to interfere here or we don't want to interfere here. We want to see what's happening in the country or the world. That's a conversation in a democracy that they could have, and they could put that to a vote, but they don't want to because they are afraid the answer is not the same as it is when they say, do you want to give us this? Because if you don't, your children will die. If we have a more complex, nuanced conversation, you get different and better answers, right? But as you asked today, what does this mean? It means mass surveillance is never going to solve our problems, but it will make our lives worse.
So Edward, we're out of time, but this is also our conference, so we can break the rules a little bit. I have two more questions, and we'll wrap it up. So the next question, in this day and age, it seems like no one has any privacy. How is it possible that we still have no idea who Satoshi is? And what does that tell us about Satoshi?
This is one of the most interesting parts of the Bitcoin story, which is why we're still talking about it all of these years later. And the thing that I love about it is the story that it tells us. OPSEC works, right? Operational security. If you're careful, if you learn how the system works, better than the people who are exploiting it to harm you, better than the people who built it, right? You can use it in ways that actually work to your advantage, even though you don't own it, right? And Satoshi Nakamoto, right? He may have written the paper, he may have laid the groundwork, he may have given us, in a real way, the Bitcoin system, peer-to-peer electronic cash system that it is. But he did not create the internet, or they did not create the internet, all of these other systems. But they took the time to understand them well enough that despite all of the time that they were engaged in, despite all the way they were communicating and despite all the time they were creating on it, and despite all of the interest and all of the honestly unimaginable and unpredictable level of resources that were applied to them years later. And the thing about OPSEC is if you make one mistake once, early on, and the internet never forgets, that mistake never goes away. You still can have privacy. And this is the problem. Right now we live in a world where privacy is for the professional, it's for the expert, it's for the rich, it's for the elite, it is for the privileged. But we can't live in a free world where privacy is a privilege. Privacy has to be right, it has to be accessible to everyone if it's going to actually happen.
So one more question for you. This is perhaps the most important question. Is Edward Snowden a Bitcoin hodler?
So, as a privacy advocate, never asked to deny having any cryptocurrency whatsoever. But I will say this. The story of 2013, right? And it's, there's a lot of nuance we don't have time to discuss here because it's not about this, but, people think I published stuff in 2013. They think I told the truth and everybody knew all that stuff. But that's not actually how it worked. I gathered evidence of what I believe to be criminal or unconstitutional or simply just rights violating behavior by the government. And I took the evidence of that and I gave it to journalists. Because I wanted them to take my political biases and my strong feelings out of the equation. And they got this information on the condition that they published no story because it was interesting or no story because it was news, but only published stories that they were willing to stake their reputation on, the fact that it was in the public interest to know these things. Right? And really the rest is history, right? They got the story out, and the world knew how these systems worked a little bit better. It doesn't have to, change the world. I didn't set out to change the world. I just wanted people to understand what their government was doing, both in their name and against it, right? But it has caused a lot of good for the world, I believe. I was once accused in the aftermath by the US government's most senior intelligence official, then General James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence. He said, we're pulling forward the adoption of commercial cryptography by 7 years. And he meant this is a very terrible thing. It was the worst thing done. And I was like, oh, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said. Here's the thing why I tell kids. Well, I won't say whether I have Bitcoin or anything else, right? The servers that I used to transfer this information to journalists, because I didn't want these records connected to my name when I understood how the system of mass surveillance worked, they were paid for using Bitcoin.
Snowden can see this, but can we give a huge round of applause for a freedom fighter? Thank you.